We gardeners are really a crazy bunch. We take something that should be quite easy and simple and make it as difficult as possible. And we take something that really doesn't need to cost much at all and we throw a whole bunch of money at it. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott. I'm a Colorado Zone 5B Master Gardener. And I've been gardening for more than 30 years, and I've been teaching gardening classes since 2004. I have a lot of experience, and I've spent a lot of money in my garden over the years, which means I've learned how to make things simple and how to avoid spending money. Even with all my gardening experience and my gardening knowledge, I start small whenever I start a new garden. I think it's important to spend the time to figure out where the best location is for a garden. I like to take a year. So I came out to this space and spent a lot of time just observing and trying to figure out where I was going to put my vegetable garden. And I wasn't sure at first. I spent a lot of time figuring it out, but I still wanted to garden. So using less than $50 in that first year, that's how I got started in this space. I went to my local bakery at a supermarket nearby and asked them for some empty containers of frosting. Well, the frosting containers are typically just thrown away, and most stores will give them to you for free. And so I had 6 or 8 of these frosting buckets, cleaned them out, spent less than $20 on an average potting soil to fill them, and then spent, about $5 on some seeds to start growing my plants. I did buy a tomato plant, I think for $3. So in these frosting buckets, I grew a tomato, I grew a couple peppers, I had some radishes and lettuce and carrots and a number of herbs, and I grew through the course of the season. Now, the way I approach gardening is with succession planting. So in one of the buckets I was growing radishes and lettuce, which can grow very quickly. And at the end of a month, I had a harvest. Well, I was able to harvest that lettuce and those radishes and then put new seeds in that particular bucket and keep growing until the frost threatened. And one nice thing about containers like that is even later in the season when the frost starts to hit, you can bring the buckets into a garage so that they don't freeze and then put them out in the sun. And so at the end of that first season, with free buckets, about $20 worth of soil, maybe a grand total of $10 for plants and seeds, I had harvests. Now, I didn't have enough produce for every single meal, every single day, but it was a slow, simple start that gave me information about what my space was, what my weather was like, and what the best location would be to put a vegetable garden in. So starting small, starting simply was ideal for me to be able to advance to this point where I have a bigger garden with established beds. Once I figured out that this was the best location for my vegetable garden, moving into the second year, I could expand the space and start making some garden beds and still stay under that $50 threshold. One of the very first things I did when I moved to this new area was to go to my public library. And I found out that my library has a seed library, which is quite common throughout the United States. The seed library operates just like the book library. You can check out seeds for free, and you'd be surprised at the choices you have for growing different plants. The way it works is I would check out the seeds and I would plant them in my beds. And then at the end of the season, I would save some of the seed and return it to the library. That's the way book libraries work. Well, it's not just me, it's all the other gardeners who are participating in the library. They're growing plants and returning seeds. So I would be able to find enough seeds to plant out this whole space by just going to my seed library, intending to save some seeds at the end. And I wouldn't need to build these wooden boxes and spend money. Instead, I could create in-ground beds throughout this space. Now, I really like raised bed gardening. I think there are many benefits to it. But you don't have to build a box to grow in a raised bed. All you need to do is just mound up your growing area, and that elevated space is a raised bed. And I've already started doing this in some other areas of my garden. It's called lasagna gardening or sheet composting. And what you do is you dig out the material where you want your bed, because typically it's grass or weeds, and you just turn it over. And then on top of that, you add something like dried crushed leaves. And then on top of that, you add something like fresh grass. And the concept is the same as composting. You're adding carbon-rich materials and nitrogen-rich materials, browns and greens, and you're layering them like you were building a lasagna. And then occasionally I add a layer of my native soil. And by doing the organic material in my soil, over time, that organic material will decompose and enrich the soil in that space for growing. The second thing I did when I moved to this area was to join a local gardening club, because gardeners love to give away seeds and plants. And I certainly do that. I have a number of plants that I've started indoors, and I have way too many to use in my garden. So I'm more than willing to give away those plants to my fellow gardeners, just like they are to me. So if I was trying to stay under that $50 threshold, I could create a number of beds with my native soil, with the organic material that I have in my landscape, and get free seeds and free plants from fellow gardeners and start growing a pretty substantial garden. I also wouldn't waste money on fertilizers or pesticides. I don't do that now, so if I was limited by a $50 budget, I certainly wouldn't waste my money on some chemical that I may or may not need. The soil is critical in gardening. If there's one thing that you should focus your attention on, it's the soil. And so by me using organic material and my native soil, I can pretty much be assured that there's enough nutrients in that lasagna garden to grow plants, and I wouldn't have the need for adding additional fertilizers. I don't like using pesticides in my garden because I like to have a balance. I like to have beneficial insects in addition to the harmful insects. They work together. So it's okay if I have some insects that eat my lettuce leaves, or I have a different type of pest that might be munching on my turnip leaves. I'm okay with that because I know that those harmful insects are going to be attracting the beneficial insects. Every time I've had an infestation of aphids, within a week or two, I had lacewings and ladybugs that were showing up in my garden, and the aphids were the food they wanted to eat. That's the way nature works. I like to work with nature. So I'm not going to waste my money on a pesticide that might actually kill some of those beneficial insects when that's what I want to attract to the garden. So I've amended my soil, I've got my free seeds and free plants, and now I'm not really spending anything else to keep those plants growing. I do have to pay for water. I live in one of those regions where water is not free. So I have to look at saving some of the costs, because over the course of a season, it could cost more than $50 just in the cost of water, which is why I have to take some of these other precautions to avoid spending money. Well, when you have a soil that is rich in organic matter, it tends to hold the water longer. It doesn't drain right through. So right there, by amending these beds with organic matter, I'm saving some of those water costs that I might have to otherwise spend. And another thing that is critical to keeping the cost down, if you have to pay for water, is to mulch the garden beds. Now, I really like to use straw. So I suppose if I had that $50 budget, I might be willing to spend $6 or $7 on a bale of straw to mulch the beds, but that isn't necessary because I also have bags of dried grass and dried leaves, and I use that as a mulch as well. So I really don't need to spend money on straw. It's just something I prefer. But if I was really pinching the pennies, I would seek out all of my neighbors and all of my friends and get the grass and leaves from them. And that's actually how I get my grass, because I don't have a lawn. So when I need the dried grass, which I use a lot of, well, I go to my friends and family and I wait until they cut their lawn, and then I take the bags of grass and use them in my garden. I would continue to do that. It's a great way to save money. At the end of the season, I do the same with dried leaves. I save all the leaves that I can, but it's not enough for my gardening. So I seek out friends and family and neighbors and get all of their bags of leaves. And then I save them over the course of the winter and use them gradually over the course of the growing season. There are a few tools that really are needed to garden effectively. The first being a shovel to prepare some of the beds, but I've got friends and family with shovels, so I could borrow a shovel until I don't have that $50 threshold anymore. You do need a hose, and so I might search out a flea market or a garage sale to try to find a used hose. But even if I had to buy new, they're not that expensive. I don't have to have a hose. I could take one of those free cake frosting buckets and fill it at the faucet and bring it out to water the beds. But it's just so much easier with a hose. So I'm willing to make that investment. But because everything else so far has cost so little or nothing, the expenditure of buying a nice hose really won't put me anywhere near that $50 budget that I've set for myself. So I'm going to make sure that I borrow a shovel to get things started. I'm going to buy a hose and then work with my hands. I don't mind getting my fingers dirty. So as I put seeds in and as I do transplants, I can do all of it with my hands. And I don't need gloves. I'm okay if my hands get a little dirty and maybe get some calluses on them. And as I continue the harvest, I'm not throwing anything away. Part of gardening, I think, should include a compost pile. And so I take everything that I'm not eating in the kitchen and I throw it into my compost pile. And it's not just the things that come from the garden. It's the banana peels. It's all of that other stuff that you're still going to buy that you don't need to throw away. And so I'll have a compost pile, and it doesn't need to be anything more than just a pile. I don't have to spend any money at all to create compost. All I need is organic material, the greens and the browns, the nitrogens and the carbons, and I can get that every time I harvest. That's looking forward, and that's a critical part when it comes to saving money. And that's how I like to save money, is by reusing everything I can. And so bags on the curb for the trash man to take away, I don't have them. I'm making my own compost, or I'm using that organic material as a mulch or a soil amendment. And now next year, as I continue to try to save money and stay within a budget, I can add compost to the beds, because over time all that organic material that I used to begin the bed has decomposed, and the plants have used the nutrients from that material. So every year I have to add more organic material to my beds. Ideal for that is compost. And so if I can have a steady supply of compost that I'm making myself, now the beds stay rich with nutrients because of all that organic material that I'm adding to it. And then as I add more mulch, that will eventually decompose and benefit the soil as well. And again, I don't have to rely on fertilizers because I'm building a healthy soil. And it's all those soil microorganisms that are at play that take that organic matter and make it available to the plants. And by learning more and more about gardening, even within the first year, I can begin to recognize some of the things that I would like to have, and I can expand my network that way. I've heard that manure is great for the garden. Well, it doesn't take much effort to find someone who is dying to give away horse manure. I've done that this year. I've got a big pile of steer manure that's behind me, and I also have alpaca manure because I heard alpaca manure was great, and I sought out a source for alpaca manure. No cost whatsoever, other than to just drive and take the bags that they'd already raked up. There are so many things like that. With the knowledge comes the need, and the need offers opportunity. And by taking that opportunity, now I can continue to expand my garden. I can use manures in addition to the compost, or use the manures to help make the compost. None of it costs anything, and all of it helps enrich the soil and the garden. That's how I would do it. That's how I am doing it. Now, I like these beds, and these beds are in many of my videos, and I have many different types of beds so that I can do videos about the different types of beds. But as I discussed much earlier, I don't have to have something like this. I just have to have the knowledge, the desire, and the willingness to build that network and ask for help from other gardeners to really create a substantial garden after starting off small and figuring out just exactly what it is I need to have the best success. And I encourage you get started and not be held back by how much money you think you need to spend, because you can do an awful lot, and you can do most of it for free. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.